One of my dormmates came up to me last tonight and said, "Can you do something about the gas?" "What gas?" She collapsed right there in front of me. I knelt down and tried to shake her awake, but her eyes had rolled back. I couldn't understand why until I stepped into the hallway and smelled gas in the air, sweet and chemical like nothing I'd encountered before. My head started spinning immediately. I pulled my mask out of my bag. We were still in CO protocols, and I carried one everywhere. I strapped it on and started checking doors. The cloth wouldn't stop gas, but maybe it would buy me time. The first dorm room I opened revealed 3 students on the floor, motionless. A second room had 2 more, slumped against the wall. Their skin looked gray in the fluorescent light. Everywhere I checked showed the same thing. Bodies and hallways in the communal bathroom. Some had tried to crawl toward exits, but didn't make it. The gas smell got stronger near the stairwell, which made me realize it was coming from below, from the basement mechanical systems. I ran down the stairs, taking them 3 at a time, and burst outside. My hands shook as I dialed 911. I told them everyone in my building had passed out, and the place smelled like gas. The dispatcher didn't sound rushed, just calm and clinical, asking for the address and how many people were inside. "Stay where you are. Emergency services are on the way." A fire truck pulled up within minutes, followed by ambulances and police cars. A firefighter jumped out with his mask already on and asked me what happened. I explained it all as fast as I could, while more first responders rushed past us into the building. He tilted his head, looking at me strangely. "That's not normal, son." I asked what he meant, but he didn't answer, just disappeared into the building with 2 others carrying air, quality meters, and emergency equipment. 20 minutes later, they came back out and immediately started setting up barriers. The whole building was taped off. More trucks arrived, cops in tactical gear, people in hazmat suits. The parking lot transformed into a command center. They pulled me aside and started asking questions. How did I notice the gas first? Why was I the only one standing when everyone else collapsed? Was I armed? Did I have tools? Did I have access to restricted areas? The questions got more pointed as different officers took turns interrogating me. I told them I didn't know why I was okay. I just knew I had my mask on and got out fast, but they didn't look convinced. They kept asking about my schedule, my relationship with other students, whether I had problems with anyone in the building, if I'd been in the basement recently. Later that night, one of the detectives brought me to a police van with monitors inside. He showed me security footage from the basement, time-stamped from early that morning. At first, it looked empty, just pipes and shadows and the usual mechanical equipment. Then, movement in the corner, someone in a clown mask approaching the HVAC system. The figure moved with purpose. No hesitation, they went straight to specific valves and started turning them, opening things that should stay closed, connecting hoses that didn't belong. The detective froze the frame, showing the mask clearly. White face, red nose, grotesque smile. This wasn't an accident, he said. It was deliberate. I asked if they knew who it was or why someone would do this. He didn't answer, just rewound the footage and pressed play again. This time, he zoomed in on a different angle. The clown figure turned toward the camera for half a second while adjusting something on their belt. A ring of keys was visible. The detective's eyes flicked back to me. Funny thing is, he said they didn't break in. Whoever this is, they had a key. The weight of that statement hung between us. I worked maintenance for the university. My job gave me access to every building on campus, including master keys for emergencies. The interrogation suddenly felt less like witness questioning and more like suspect evaluation. He pulled up another screen showing keycard access logs. My name appeared multiple times over the past month, all legitimate entries for scheduled maintenance, but suspicious in this new context. The detective asked me to account for each visit, asked if anyone could verify my whereabouts this morning. I explained that several people had master keys, but the list was short and they'd be checking everyone. The detective made notes without commenting. His partner arrived with evidence bags containing the gas canisters they'd found in the basement. Industrial grade, not something you'd buy at a hardware store. They kept me there for 3 more hours, going over the footage, comparing body types, asking about my knowledge of HVAC systems. By the end, they had enough circumstantial evidence to be suspicious, but nothing concrete. The detective finally let me leave, but made it clear I shouldn't go far. As I walked to my car, he called out one more thing. 37 students are in the hospital, 4 in critical condition. If any of them don't make it, this becomes attempted murder. I got in my car and my hands shook so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. The steering wheel felt slippery under my palms as I pulled out of the station parking lot. My phone buzzed 3 times on the passenger seat while I drove, but I didn't look at it until I got home. 2 calls from work and 2 from numbers I didn't recognize. I grabbed the phone and checked voicemail while walking to my apartment door. My supervisor's voice came through, shaky and weird, like someone was standing next to her telling her what to. She said, "Don't come in tomorrow and check my email right away." I fumbled with my keys at the door and finally got inside. My laptop was on the kitchen table and I flipped it open while the voicemail kept playing. The email from HR was already waiting in my inbox, marked urgent with a red flag. Administrative leave effective, immediately pending investigation. Conclusion: They wanted all my keys and access cards returned by noon tomorrow. I was banned from campus, except for official meetings related to the case. My stomach twisted as I read it 3 more times to make sure I understood. 3 years working there and now I couldn't even step foot on campus. I scrolled to Tucker's number and called, but it went straight to voicemail without even ringing. I tried 2 more times with the same result. The other maintenance guys weren't answering either. Everyone I'd worked with for years suddenly wouldn't pick up their phones. I made some instant noodles, but couldn't eat them. The TV was on, but I wasn't watching it. I kept seeing that clown mask from the security footage turning toward the camera. The way they moved through that basement like they'd been there 100 times before. They knew exactly which valves to turn and where the gas hookups were. My eyes wouldn't stay closed when I tried to sleep. Every time I shut them, I saw those students collapsed in the hallway. I got up and paced around my apartment until my legs hurt. At 3:00 the morning, my phone lit up with a text from Tucker. HR told them not to contact to me, but he wanted me to know he didn't think I did it. The message disappeared from my screen 30 seconds later, but I'd already taken a screenshot. At least one person didn't think I was a monster. I finally passed out around 4 and woke up at 7 to my alarm. I had to be on campus by noon to turn in my stuff. The drive there felt like heading to my own execution. Security was waiting for me at the main gate and followed me to the facilities building. Students stopped and stared as we walked past. Someone pulled out their phone and took a picture. A group near the fountain started whispering and pointing. The security guard stayed right behind me the whole time, like I might run or do something crazy. My supervisor was in the office when we got there, but she wouldn't look at me. She held out a box for my keys and access cards while staring at the wall behind me. Her hands shook as she took each item and checked, colored off a list. Just cooperate, and this will blow over, she whispered, but her voice cracked, and I could tell she didn't believe it. The security guard walked me back out through the main quad, where more students had gathered. A white news van was setting up in the visitor parking lot. The reporter I recognized from Channel 7, Michelle Curry, started walking toward me with her cameraman. The security guard stepped between us and pushed me toward my car. "Keep moving," he said. Michelle tried to go around him, but another guard blocked her. They practically shoved me into my car and stood there until I drove away. I went straight home and locked the door. My phone was already buzzing with notifications. I opened my laptop and there it was on the local news site. Maintenance worker, person of interest in campus gas attack. They didn't use my name, but the article said a university employee with master key access was investigated. It mentioned I was the one who called 911 and was found at the scene. Anyone who knew me would figure it out in seconds. The article had over 300 comments already, people calling for justice and saying whoever did this should get the death penalty. My Facebook started blowing up with friend requests from reporters and messages from people I hadn't talked to in years. Then the nasty messages started coming. Parents of students saying I was evil and should rot in hell. Someone found my Instagram and posted my picture in the comments of the news article. My phone rang and it was a number I didn't know. When I answered, a woman screamed that her daughter was in the ICU because of me. I hung up and turned off my phone, but my laptop kept pinging with notifications. Every social media account I had was getting bombed with hate. I made everything private as fast as I could, but screenshots were already spreading. Someone posted my address on Twitter, a photo of my car with the license plate visible. They were turning me into a monster before anyone even knew what really happened. I closed my laptop and sat in the dark. This morning, I was just a maintenance worker. And now the whole city thought I tried to kill 37 students. My laptop kept buzzing with more notifications. Even after I made everything private, the screenshots were already out there spreading like wildfire across Twitter and Reddit. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through the messages that came in before I locked everything down. One mother said her daughter was on a ventilator and she hoped I'd burn in hell. Another parent sent photos of their son hooked up to machines and called me a monster who should rot in prison. The messages kept coming through Facebook even though I'd changed all my settings. Parents found ways to message me through old group pages and mutual friends. Each one was worse than the last, with people describing what they wanted to do to me. I had to turn off my laptop completely to make it stop. My phone started ringing and I almost didn't answer, but then I saw it was from the hospital. A woman named Gabriela Romero said she was calling from the ICU about my friend from the dorm. She said he'd just woken up and was asking what happened to everyone. She couldn't give me medical details because of privacy rules, but wanted me to know he was stable now. That meant one less potential murder charge if the worst happened with the others. I thanked her and hung up, feeling a tiny bit of relief for the first time all day. At least he was going to be okay. Even if my life was falling apart, I spent the rest of the evening going through my calendar on my phone, trying to figure out where I was. That morning, the attack happened around 6 a.m., according to the news, and I was home asleep like always, but living alone meant nobody could verify that, and my phone was charging in the kitchen. I pulled out my credit card, statements, and bank records, looking for anything that might help. No purchases that morning, but that didn't prove anything since I rarely bought stuff. Before work, my last transaction was gas. The night before, at a station 10 miles from campus, the timestamp showed 9:47. p.m., which meant I went straight home after like usual. I made a list of everything I could remember from the past week, but it all looked normal. Work schedules and grocery runs and nothing that would help prove I didn't do this. My phone rang again, and this time it was the detective from earlier. His voice was calm but serious as he said they needed me to come in tomorrow for more questions. He suggested I might want to bring a lawyer, which made my stomach drop hard. Innocent people shouldn't need lawyers, but here he was, basically telling me to get one. I asked if I was under arrest, and he said not yet, but things were developing quickly. He gave me a time to be at the station and hung up without saying goodbye. I sat there staring at my phone, knowing this was getting worse by the hour. The only lawyer I knew was Christopher Flynn, who worked as the union rep for maintenance staff. I found his number in my contacts and called, even though it was getting late. He answered on the third ring, and I explained everything as fast as I could. He said this was serious and told me not to talk to anyone without him there. We agreed to meet an hour before the police interview so he could prep me. He kept saying to stay calm, but his voice sounded worried, which didn't help at all. After we hung up, I tried to eat something, but couldn't get food down. I kept thinking about those security videos and how someone was setting me up. Around 10 that night, I noticed headlights outside my apartment window. A dark sedan was parked across the street with someone sitting inside. The car hadn't been there when I got home, and nobody on my street drove anything that nice. I turned off my lights and watched through the blinds as the person adjusted their mirror. They were definitely watching my building and probably watching me. Specifically, the surveillance made everything feel more real and more scary than before. I barely slept that night, knowing someone was outside keeping tabs on me. Every time I looked out the window, the car was still there with the car paw shadow inside. Christopher met me at a coffee shop the next morning looking serious in his suit. He pulled out a legal pad and started explaining my rights while I drank black coffee. He said circumstantial evidence could be enough for an arrest, even without direct proof. The key was finding evidence that pointed away from me toward the real person. He went through a list of questions they might ask and how I should answer them. Short responses without extra details that could be twisted around later. He reminded me I could refuse to answer anything and ask for breaks whenever needed. The whole conversation made me feel like a criminal, even though I hadn't done anything wrong. We drove separately to the police station and walked in together at exactly the time they specified. The detective was waiting in the same interview room as before with a thick folder. He nodded at Christopher and started pulling out papers without any small talk. The first thing he showed me was a work order dated last week for HVAC maintenance. My employee ID number was right there at the bottom, like I'd filed it myself, but I knew I never submitted any work order for that building's basement systems. Christopher grabbed my arm before I could say anything and asked for a copy to review. The detective looked annoyed, but slid a photocopy across the table to us. I noticed right away that the timestamp showed 2:15 p.m. last Tuesday afternoon. I was across campus at the science building doing filter replacements that whole day. I pointed at the timestamp and told the detective I was at another location. Then he made a note but didn't look, convinced, and pulled out more papers from his folder. He started asking about my relationships with students in that dorm and whether I'd had any complaints. I told him I barely knew any students personally and just fixed things when work orders came in. The detective's phone buzzed and he glanced at it before sliding another paper across the table. This one showed more work orders with my ID number that I knew I never filed. Christopher grabbed my arm harder this time, and I could feel him warning me to stay quiet. The detective kept pulling out papers and asking about each one, while his partner typed notes on a laptop. My throat felt dry, and I kept drinking water from the paper cup they gave me. After 2 more hours of the same questions over and over, Christopher finally stood up. "We need a break." The detective nodded and left the room with his partner. Christopher pulled me to the corner and spoke quietly. "Someone's definitely trying to frame you, and we need to figure out who has access to that work order system." I nodded, but my brain felt foggy from all the questions. When the detective came back, he had a different folder, and his expression looked less hostile. "We've identified the industrial gas supplier." He showed me an invoice number from a chemical company downtown. The purchase was made 2 weeks ago with cash, but the buyer had to show ID, which they were tracking down. He pointed to the signature line, which was just a scribble. The amount was over $3,000 for specialized canisters that only certain industries used. His partner came in, carrying a tablet, and whispered something to him. The detective nodded and turned the tablet toward me. "Found something interesting in the basement, footage we wanted to ask about." He played a clip showing the person in the clown mask walking, and there was a slight limp in their right leg. "Notice anything about their walk?" His partner stood up and asked me to walk across the room. I got up and walked normally from one wall to the other and back again. They watched carefully and made notes. "No limp," the partner said. Christopher gathered our things and said we were done for today unless they were charging me. The detective didn't argue, and we left the interview room. Outside the station, Christopher walked me to his car and opened the passenger door. "Get in. I'll drive you home." During the drive, he kept checking his mirrors like he was watching for someone following us. "We need to start our own investigation because the police are too focused on you right now." He turned onto my street and pulled up to my apartment building. "Make a list of everyone with master key access and knowledge of the HVAC system. I went inside and opened my laptop right away. The spreadsheet took shape quickly with names and departments and schedules. I knew most of the maintenance staff personally after 3 years on the job. Column by column, I added their specialties and certifications and which buildings they covered. Only 5 of us had both master, keys, and HVAC training, which narrowed things down. Me, Tucker, our supervisor, and 2 senior guys who'd been there over 10 years. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was Tucker using a burner phone, saying he couldn't talk openly. Our supervisor had been acting strange all week, staying late, and going through personnel files. He thought she was looking for someone to blame to protect the department from lawsuits. Another text came through, saying she'd been shredding documents yesterday after everyone left. I saved the screenshots and kept working on my spreadsheet, adding more details. That evening around 7, my phone rang, showing Gabriella's number from the hospital. Your friend is getting better and starting to remember things from that morning. She said he kept mentioning hearing keys jingling right before he collapsed. The sound stuck in his memory because it was so loud and distinct in the quiet hallway. That matched what I suspected about the perpetrator having building access. She said the detective would interview him tomorrow once the doctor cleared it. I thanked her and hung up, feeling slightly hopeful for the first time. The news was on my laptop, so I clicked over to the local station's website. The university had released a statement about improving security measures, but didn't mention the investigation. The safety director was quoted saying they were cooperating fully with authorities. He talked about new protocols and safety, audits, and increased campus police patrols. Nothing about how someone with keys had nearly killed 37 students. The whole statement felt like damage control to protect enrollment numbers. I kept scrolling through comments from parents, demanding answers, and students saying they didn't feel safe. Around midnight, I finally closed my laptop and tried to sleep. My brain wouldn't shut off, and I kept thinking about that work order at 2:00 the morning. My phone rang, showing an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. There was just breathing for a few seconds, and then a whisper, "Stop digging, or you'll be next." The line went dead before I could respond. My hands shook as I immediately called Christopher, even though it was the middle of the night. He answered on the 3rd ring, sounding alert, like he wasn't sleeping either. Someone just threatened me. I told him exactly what happened, and he said to report it to the police. We both knew they'd probably think I was making it up to look like a victim. I'll file the report anyway to create a paper trail. He said this actually helps our case because whoever's behind this is getting nervous about something. The next morning, Tucker called while I was making coffee and told me they'd brought in another maintenance worker for questioning. The subcontractor who handles our emergency HVAC calls got picked up at his apartment around 6. Tucker saw him at the loading dock that morning before everything happened, carrying this huge duffel bag that looked heavy. I typed all this into an email for the detective, including the exact time Tucker saw him and what the bag looked like. The detective wrote back within 10 minutes saying they knew about the subcontractor and were checking all leads. His message seemed less angry than before, like maybe he was starting to think I wasn't the only possibility. My phone rang and Christopher's name showed on the screen. He'd been digging through the work order system all night and found something weird. Multiple entries had been backdated recently, not just the fake one with my name on it. Someone with supervisor access had been changing records going back 3 months, which looked like they were covering something up. While he talked, I remembered our safety director fighting hard against the security upgrades we'd proposed last year. He kept saying they cost too much and weren't necessary, even though we'd had break-ins before. Now, I wondered if he knew the building was vulnerable and didn't want a paper trail showing he'd ignored the problem. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number that turned out to be Seth Vaughn from it. He wanted to meet privately because he'd found something strange in the system. Logs from that morning. We met at a coffee shop off campus where he showed me his laptop screen. Someone had tried to delete the access records for the basement that morning, but Seth recovered them from an automatic backup the system makes every hour. The recovered logs showed something huge. A supervisor override code was used to access the basement at 4 inches the morning, 2 hours before the attack happened. Only 3 people had that level of override. In the whole university, our safety director, my direct supervisor, and the facilities VP, Seth, made copies of everything on a flash drive and gave it to me. I drove straight to Christopher's office and showed him what Seth found. Christopher studied the logs for 20 minutes, making notes and cross-referencing with other documents he had. He said this was significant evidence, but we needed more before accusing anyone that high up. We should look into whether any of them had connections to the subcontractor who might have done the actual work. That made sense because whoever planned this probably didn't want to be on camera doing it themselves. My phone rang that afternoon, and the detective's voice sounded excited for the first time. The gas supplier had identified who bought the canisters using a credit card. The ID was fake, using someone's stolen identity from another state, but they had security footage from the purchase. Their tech guys were cleaning up the video to get a clear face shot. While I processed that news, my phone buzzed with another unknown number. Michelle Curry's voice came through, asking if I'd give her my side of the story for the news. She'd gotten my number from someone at the university and wanted an exclusive interview. Christopher grabbed the phone from me and told her I couldn't comment during an active investigation. After he hung up, he said, "The media could destroy me worse than the cops if I said the wrong thing, but I kept thinking about how everyone online had already decided I was guilty. My neighbors looked at me different, and parents were calling the university, demanding I be fired. Maybe talking to Michelle would help people see I was framed. Christopher saw me thinking and said if I really wanted to make a statement, we should write it carefully, together. No interview, just a written statement Michelle could publish exactly as we wrote it. We spent 2 hours crafting 3 paragraphs that maintained my innocence while expressing sympathy for the victims. I talked about cooperating fully with investigators and trusting the truth would come out. Christopher made sure nothing could be twisted or taken out of context. Michelle agreed to publish it word for word without any editorial changes or commentary. She said it would run on their website that night and in the morning paper. I felt slightly better, having my side out there, even though Christopher warned me plenty of people I wouldn't believe it. The statement went live at 8 that evening, and within an hour I had dozens of messages. Some were supportive, saying they knew something, felt wrong about blaming me so fast. Others were nastier than before, calling me a liar and saying innocent people don't need prepared statements. I turned off my phone and tried to focus on what we'd learned. 3 people had override access, and one of them used it at 4 in the morning. The subcontractor was at the building with a duffel bag around the time of the attack. Someone was systematically changing records to hide something, and whoever threatened me was getting scared enough to take risks. The pieces were starting to connect, but we still didn't know who was behind it all, or why they'd risk killing 37 students. Christopher said to keep documenting everything and let him work on finding connections between the subcontractor and the 3 supervisors. Something would break soon because criminals always make mistakes when they panic. My phone started buzzing with notifications as the statement spread online and people began sharing their reactions. Most comments were still angry, but scattered between them were messages from students saying they remembered me, fixing their broken heaters last winter, or helping carry furniture during move-in day. One girl wrote that I'd stayed late to fix her roommate's window lock when she felt unsafe, and she couldn't believe I'd hurt anyone. Another student posted that the whole thing felt rushed and asked why the cops were so quick to blame maintenance staff instead of looking at all the evidence. The responses gave me a tiny bit of hope, even though plenty of people still called me guilty and said my statement was just damage control. Gabriella called the next morning to tell me my friend had been moved from the ICU to a regular room, and she'd arranged for me to visit him briefly that afternoon if I wanted. I drove to the hospital with my hands shaking on the steering wheel because seeing him would make everything more real than just hearing updates. The smell of disinfectant hit me as soon as I walked through the sliding doors and followed Gabriella's directions to the 3rd floor. She met me at the nurse's station wearing scrubs with cartoon cats on them and led me down a hallway lined with beeping monitors. My friend looked smaller somehow, lying in that hospital bed with an oxygen tube under his nose and IV lines running into his arm. His eyes opened when I pulled up a chair, and he reached out to squeeze my hand with more strength than I expected. He whispered that he knew I didn't do this and had been telling everyone who'd listened. But most people thought he was. Confused from the gas, his voice got stronger as he told me something that made my heart race. Right before he collapsed, he'd been walking to the bathroom when he heard a woman's voice in the hallway say, "It's done," in a flat tone, like she was reporting to someone. He said the cops hadn't asked him about this yet, because they'd only talked to him briefly when he first woke up and mostly asked if he remembered seeing me that morning. We both realized he might be the only person who heard the actual attacker, and this could change everything about the investigation. I pulled out my phone right there in his hospital room and called the detective, who answered on the second ring, sounding tired. I explained what my friend had just told me about hearing a woman's voice, and the detective went quiet for a long moment before saying this was definitely worth following up. He said they'd send someone to interview my friend officially tomorrow morning and warned me not to coach him on what to say or it would look suspicious. After I left the hospital, my phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Seth containing files he'd pulled from the university system. The records showed someone had used my supervisor's login credentials to alter maintenance schedules and work orders. But her access card showed she wasn't even in the building when the changes were made. Either someone had stolen her login information, or she was lying about where she'd been that morning, which opened up new questions. I forwarded everything to Christopher, who said we should meet with the detective immediately to share what Seth had found. The next morning, Christopher and I sat across from the detective in an interview room while he scrolled through the files on his laptop. For the first time since this started, he looked at me differently and said I was starting to look less like a suspect and more like someone being set up to take the fall for institutional failures. He asked if we had any other evidence, and Christopher pulled out a folder with printouts showing the pattern of altered records going back months. The detective took notes and said they were expanding the investigation to look at university officials who might have had reasons to cover things up. The next day, the news broke that my supervisor had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation, and the whole campus was buzzing about it. The safety director called a press conference that afternoon, trying to control the narrative and insisting the university had always prioritized student safety above everything else. I watched the live stream from my apartment while the detective sat next to me on my couch, taking notes. The safety director was sweating under the lights as reporters asked tough questions about deferred maintenance and budget cuts. Then he made a mistake that changed everything when he mentioned the specific type of gas canisters used in the attack and how they required special valves to connect to the HVAC system. The detective immediately stood up and made a phone call because those details had never been released to the public or even mentioned in internal reports. He stepped out into my hallway, speaking urgently to someone while I kept watching the safety director stumble through more questions. Tucker called me 20 minutes later, sounding shocked, and said our supervisor had just cleaned out her office and left campus crying. She'd stopped at his workstation and told him she'd been pressured for months to alter safety records and hide violations to protect the budget. She said she couldn't take it anymore and was going to tell the truth about everything, even if it meant losing her pension. The detective came back into my apartment and sat down with a different expression on his face than I'd seen before. He said they were getting warrants for all university emails and financial records, going back 2 years to see who knew what and when they knew it. Then he did something I never expected and actually apologized for focusing on me so hard at the beginning and said I was no longer considered a person of interest in the case. That evening, I was eating leftover pizza when the detective called, saying they'd arrested the subcontractor an hour ago. He said the guy's limp matched the figure in the video perfectly, and his work boots tested positive for the same chemical found in the basement. I drove to the station where they let me watch through one-way glass as 2 detectives questioned him. In the interview room, the subcontractor sat there sweating and fidgeting with his hands while they showed him the evidence. After 20 minutes, he broke down and admitted someone paid him 20,000 inches cash to set up the gas release. He kept insisting he thought it was just to force an evacuation for some kind of protest and didn't know anyone would get hurt. The detectives pressed him about who paid him, and he finally gave them a name that led to a shell company. Over the next 2 days, investigators traced the money back to a construction firm that had lost the bid for campus renovations last year. The safety director had apparently promised to them the contract, but couldn't deliver when the board chose someone else. This whole thing was revenge for that double cross and an attempt to make the current contractor look bad. My supervisor called me 3 days later crying and saying she wanted to meet. We sat in a coffee shop while she explained how the safety director had been pressuring her for months to falsify records and hide violations. She'd agreed to testify in exchange for immunity and spent 4 hours giving a deposition about the kickbacks he'd been taking from contractors for years. The detective met with me and Christopher the next week to explain they had enough evidence to charge both the subcontractor and safety director with conspiracy and attempted murder. The investigation had uncovered corruption going back 3 years with altered safety reports and diverted funds. Christopher immediately started working on my wrongful suspension claim against the university. Within 48 hours, they offered a settlement that included 6 months back pay and clearing my record completely. They also offered me a promotion to help oversee new safety protocols they were rushing to implement. I accepted the settlement and went back to work the following Monday. Tucker practically tackled me with a hug when I walked into the maintenance office. Most of my coworkers welcomed to me back, though a few people still gave me suspicious looks in the hallway. The safety director's trial started 3 months later and lasted 2 weeks. The prosecutor laid out all the evidence, including the video footage and financial records and testimony from multiple witnesses. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours before finding him guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 15 years in prison, while the subcontractor got 8 years. As part of his plea deal for cooperating, the university president resigned the day after the verdict, citing personal reasons. Though everyone knew it was because of the scandal, they brought in a reform-minded replacement from another state who immediately started implementing changes. My friend had been recovering steadily, and we'd grown closer through everything that happened. He testified at the trial about hearing a woman's voice right before he collapsed, saying something was done. That testimony helped convict the safety director's secretary, who'd been helping coordinate the whole thing. 6 months after the attack, all 37 students had recovered and returned to campus. The university finally installed the comprehensive security systems they should have had years ago, including upgraded cameras and access controls and regular safety audits. They held a ceremony to mark the reopening of the renovated dorm with new HVAC systems and multiple fail-safes. Some parents wanted the building torn down, but survivors said keeping it showed they wouldn't let fear win. I stood there watching students move back in and thought about how that morning when I found her collapsed had changed everything, not just because of the attack itself, but because it exposed years of corruption that could have gotten more people killed eventually. The new safety measures and oversight would prevent something like this from happening again. Christopher stayed in touch and helped me understand my rights better after everything we'd been through together. He said what happened showed why everyone needs to know their legal protections, whether they're guilty or innocent. I kept the screenshots Tucker had sent me and the files Seth recovered as reminders of how quickly you can go from witness to suspect. The detective even apologized again at the trial for how hard they'd focused on me at first. He said in 20 years of police work, he'd never seen someone framed so thoroughly by people in positions of trust. My promotion meant I was now helping oversee all the new protocols and making sure no administrator could override safety measures again. Tucker joined my team along with 2 other maintenance workers who'd supported me during the investigation. We did monthly audits that couldn't be altered or hidden and reported directly to the board instead of going through administrators. The whole experience taught me that sometimes the real danger isn't from outsiders, but from the people who are supposed to protect you. 3 weeks after the verdict, the new university president called me into her office and offered me a position nobody expected, head of safety compliance with a mandate to rebuild everything from scratch. The Irony wasn't lost on me that getting framed for the attack put me in charge of preventing the next one. I accepted the job and started that Monday with an office in the same building where they'd interrogated me. Christopher called to congratulate me, and we ended up grabbing coffee every few weeks after that. He kept teaching me about workers' rights and due process and how the system actually works when you're on the wrong side of it. Said everyone should know this stuff before they need it, not after. The construction crews started renovating the dorm that summer, and I watched them install new HVAC systems with triple redundancy and chemical sensors that would trigger automatic shutdowns. Some parents formed a committee demanding the whole building get demolished, but the survivors pushed back hard. They wanted a memorial plaque by the entrance, listing everyone who'd been there that morning. The university agreed and had it installed by fall semester. I brought Tucker onto my team, along with 2 other maintenance workers who'd backed me during the investigation. We set up monthly safety audits that went straight to the board of trustees. No middle management filters allowed. Every violation got documented and fixed within 30 days, or the responsible administrator faced termination. No more covering things up to save money. The audits found problems everywhere, like expired fire extinguishers and blocked emergency exits and faulty ventilation in the cost chemistry labs. We fixed them all and kept finding more. Michelle called me the next spring wanting to do a follow-up story for the 1-year anniversary. She came to my office with a camera crew and asked how I went from suspect to safety chief. I told her the attack exposed problems that had been festering for years, and now we were fixing them properly. The story ran on the evening news and got picked up nationally. My friend graduated that May, and they asked him to speak at commencement. He stood at the podium in front of thousands and talked about waking up in the ICU, not knowing if I'd been arrested for putting him there. Said watching me fight the false accusations while he recovered taught him that truth wins if you don't quit fighting for it. His parents found me after the ceremony and hugged me and cried. Other universities started calling, asking about our new safety protocols, and the president started sending me to conferences to present our reforms, standing in hotel ballrooms, explaining ventilation, safeguards, and access controls to administrators who took notes like their careers depended on it. Felt surreal. One conference in Chicago had 800 attendees, and they all wanted copies of our audit templates and emergency response plans. The university that almost destroyed me became the model everyone else copied. I kept thinking about that morning when she collapsed in front of me, asking about gas before her eyes rolled back. Everything that followed from finding all those students unconscious to getting interrogated to watching the real criminals get convicted to implementing changes that would save lives nobody even knew were at risk. The attack killed nobody, but it could have killed dozens if I hadn't been there. or if the paramedics had been 5 minutes slower, or if the gas concentration had been slightly higher. Instead, it exposed the rot in the system and forced changes that probably prevented future disasters nobody would ever know about. That's the thing about safety work that most people don't understand. Success looks like nothing happening. Thanks for hanging out with me on this one. It's been a ride, and I'm glad we got to share these moments together. I'll catch you in the next one. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.